What are the qualifications for elder? What do the scriptures say? Well, before we get into any of that, there's one thing that we cannot skip, and that is the prerequisite of aspiring to the office. So here I have the New American Standard Bible, and we're going to be in 1 Timothy chapter 3 when we look at qualifications for elder. But we can't jump straight into the qualifications before reading the prerequisite found in verse 1. So I'm using the New American Standard, and I have the Morphological Greek New Testament right next to it. Let's read the verse, and then let's dig into what is the prerequisite before even getting into any of the qualifications. So from the New American Standard, it is a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it is a fine work he desires to do. So from the Greek, pistos halagos, e tis episkopes, oregetai, kalu, ergu, epithumi. So in this first section, it speaks directly and specifically about those who lead the church with authority. And it's easy to understand why those people would be interested in a text like this, because they would be asking themselves the questions, do I qualify? Am I disqualified? What should I be striving towards? And it is even a reminder to those of us already in the office to be asking ourselves those same questions on a repeated basis, not to forget about them because they are important. They will always be important. Qualifying and ensuring that you qualify to the office of leading the church is not something that you just meet one time and then move on and never have to think about it again. It's something that should be continually true of that person. So what about the average churchgoer, the person who just is faithful to attend, to gather, but they have no desire themselves to seek that office? What would bring them to this text? Why should they pay attention and know the specifics of this? Well, I think every church member should be very interested in a text like this for at least a couple of reasons. First is these are all of God's words. All of God's words are here in the scriptures. Nothing is irrelevant. Nothing is there by accident or just as a filler. These are all very important. And another one is, while it's certainly the job of the one aspiring to the office to ensure that they do qualify to even seek the office, it's also the job of the church to identify those who qualify. And so how can you identify these people if you don't know what to look for? So if you're just an average, faithful, consistent member of a church, you should know what to look for in someone who is seeking to be a leader of the church or someone who is already there. You should know what qualifies them. And on the flip side of that, how do you know if someone is disqualified if you don't know what the qualifications are in the first place? So these are important for everyone, for the person who is aspiring to the office, for the person who is already in the office, and for the average church member. So again, before we get into all of the qualifications that are in 1 Timothy chapter 3 found after verse 1, there's one very important thing that we cannot skip, and that is the aspiring to the office. We have here in the NASB, if any man aspires to the office, that is extremely important. So let's go through this statement by statement, word by word, in the English and the Greek. So first, in the New American Standard, it is a trustworthy statement, and in the Greek, pistos halagos. So quite literally from the Greek, if we were to do just a literal word-for-word translation, pistos halagos. So pistos can mean faithful, it can mean believing, depending on how it's used and when it's used. So, I mean, literally you could say faithful, halagos, faithful, the word. So when the NASB says it is a trustworthy statement, that's a perfectly acceptable an understandable way of translating pistos halagos. And then we have our conjunction, which, so tis. A just simply means if, it can mean whether, but it usually says something like if this, and then there is a then that is usually assumed a little bit later in the context. So we have tis, and tis is our adjective here, and it's our indefinite pronoun. And so you could say if anyone, and that's an okay translation, but specifically in the NASB here, we have if any man. So where are they getting at? There is no specific word for man here. So is the NASB just bringing that in out of nowhere? Well, no. The answer is no, because this is when we need to pay really close attention to the words. Tis here is our indefinite pronoun, and specifically, it's in the masculine gender. Quite specifically, second declension masculine singular nominative, which means it's the subject. It's talking about one man, and that's what we're going to get into really quickly. So when asking the question, can a woman be an overseer in the church in the sense that 1 Timothy 3 is talking about here? And one of the cues that we take from Scripture starts here with tis, the indefinite pronoun. And it is in the masculine gender. And this is not where the entire argument for male leadership is staked, but it is important to take note of because everything that follows remains consistent with this. And in fact, if we read some of the qualifications that follow with women in mind, they really don't make any sense, or we really have to bend things around for women to fit in there, when I don't think it was Paul's intention at all to include women in this. This is limited to the man. So when we talk about tis being in the masculine gender, there's a few important things to note. One thing that we must grant first is that the masculine gender is used sometimes to refer to groups of people, and sometimes that group can include men and women. Sometimes it could include men, women, and children. Sometimes it's just referring to such a large group that all you have there is the masculine gender of the word, and you can't really take too much from that. However, this is also in the singular. So it is talking about one man. And when we have the lexical gender of the word being masculine, and lexical gender just means if you go to the Greek lexicon and look up tis, it's going to be that same form in the lexicon. So the fact that it's the masculine gender in the lexicon, that's why we say its lexical gender here is male. However, this word tis also has other uses that have a feminine gender or a neuter gender. So the fact that the masculine gender here is used is not by accident. It is referring to a man. And that's why the NASB translates if any man. And literally from the Greek, if anyone, or you could say if any man, quite literally, because it is in the masculine gender. So what we take note of from the qualifications that follow is each man must qualify. And specifically when looking at the fact that this is in the singular, men do not qualify in groups. So just because you have a good group of men around you, and that would be great if you did, that does not mean that because of that group of good, godly men around you, therefore you qualify for the office of elder. It does not work like that, because all of these qualifications apply to the specific man individually. So the personal aspect of the word, the singular here, if any man, is very important, and equally so the gender of the word is important. And so if any man, and then we have our next phrase, episkopes oregetai, if any man aspires to the office of overseer. So we have episkopes, which is simply translated, or at least in the lexicon, bishop, even though we don't use that word a ton today, at least in my tradition of churches. But it's translated bishop or overseer of the church. And then we have oregatai, which means to desire, to covet after, to stretch oneself after, to reach out after and long for something. Now, specifically, this word, it has a desire to it. That's where it's saying, if any man aspires to the office of overseer, if any man aspires, that is so crucial. And pulling out a few things out of this verb is that it is a middle verb. It is a present middle indicative. And that's important because the overseer, or the one aspiring to the office, the one desiring the office, must desire it themselves. There has to be something coming from within them that cannot be snuffed out from different kinds of discouragement or obstacles. That thing cannot be bought away, or that person cannot be enticed away from this aspiration. It's a desire that they have for themselves and that has come from within. And of course, God has put it in their hearts to aspire to that office, and even the fruit that it takes to bear as this kind of man to qualify for the office. It's still a middle verb. So it's saying the person desiring or aspiring to this office must do that themselves. They must aspire to the office. It's not going to do for someone else to desire it for you. Let's say that you have a man that is a fantastic speaker, tells stories like no one's business. He can tell a compelling story. He would make a great salesman because he can grab people's attention. He can really hook into what that person wants or what that audience wants. But if that man has no desire to seek the office of bishop, of overseer of the church, then it doesn't matter how many qualifications he meets. He does not want to do that. So this is absolutely critical. So trying to push someone into that position without the desire coming from that person is not being faithful to God's words through Paul here. And that would have terrible effects on the church and on that man, because then he would be doing something responsible for something that he does not want to do. And then there's the effort part of this, because remember, oregatai, it means to desire, to stretch out for, to reach out for, to long for. And so there's some effort that comes with that. So if you are a regular churchgoer, do you see godly, qualified men stretching themselves out to serve you? Do you see them expending their time, their all of their emotional energy, all of their mental capacities in planning and getting things together and trying to help and serve you and the church? If you see that, then that is a good sign. It's someone stretching themselves out for, longing for the office of overseer to lead God's church. And on the flip side of that, if you see leaders or someone wanting the office of overseer but not stretching themselves out for it at all, not putting forth any effort, simply wanting things to be given to them, wanting the office of overseer but not wanting to put themselves out there at all in any kind of expending of themselves, then even if they meet all of the other qualifications, then you have to question, do you aspire to the office of overseer? Because if you don't aspire, then you can still be a faithful, godly man that is committed to the church and serves it. But you cannot be an overseer because you don't aspire to the office. So that is extremely important. And so if any man aspires to the office of overseer, and then we have our final phrase here, kalu ergetu epithumi. It is a fine work he desires to do. So kalu actually means, it does mean good, but that would be more of the figurative definition of the word, because it would be good in the sense that it's good literally or morally. But the primary definition of kalu is beautiful or better or worthy, or you kind of get the idea of that word there. It is a beautiful work that he desires to do, as you could almost translate it that way. Ergu means work, very common, very commonly understood word. And then here we have epithumi. It is a fine work he desires to do. So previously we saw that the aspiration comes for eregetai, which means to desire, to stretch out for, to reach out for. And then we have epithumi, which also does mean desire, but also has a little bit different meaning than eregetai. And here it does mean desire, or to covet in the positive sense that you desire something. But epithumi is also used quite a few places with the negative connotation to lust. And so here it's obviously used in the positive context, because it doesn't make any sense to take the negative connotation of epithumi, lust. It is a fine work to lust after. That doesn't make any sense. That's why that doesn't work. And so it would take the positive connotation of epithumi. It is a fine work he desires to do. And it's from two words, epi, and then you have thumos, which means passion, or a passion, and epi is a preposition on. So we have previously, aspiring to the office is a desire that you stretch yourself out for to get that desire, to turn it into reality. And then here you have that desire retold again, and it's saying, it's talking about passion. So if you see men that are passionate about leading the church, then you can move on to, okay, now let's evaluate this man based on the qualifications lined out in Scripture. But we don't skip straight to those things, because first, this man must have a desire coming from within himself in which he stretches himself out for. And it is a desire that we can see that there is a passion in him that God has given him to do this thing, to lead his church.